Imagine a day where children are guided and nurtured in a way that honors their unique humanness. A day where, instead of being expected to change in order to fit in, children can be met right where they're at. Welcome to Where They're Planted, a podcast for parents and care providers of unique children. Caring for a child with a developmental, emotional, or behavior challenge, a neurodiverse brain, or difficult early life experiences can be confusing and exhausting. On this podcast, we'll help your child flourish and strengthen their roots by helping you not only understand them, but also gain the skills to help them bloom where they're planted. We'll use brain science, nervous system tools, collaborative strategy sessions, and a deep understanding of the developmental process to create a fertile environment around your child in order to nurture their growth. I am your host, Jen Bluske, an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience and a parent coach. My most closely held title, however, is that of a single mom of 2 thriving adopted kids, so I have walked this walk. I am truly excited to share, teach, and dive into these important topics on each episode. Welcome back to Where They're Planted. In this episode, I want to follow up on my conversation with Mark Talega, a LPC who specializes in working with gifted kids. It was just a conversation that was so insightful. He is just so knowledgeable and educated on thinking about giftedness and really how we support potential in gifted kids and in gifted adults. And so if you haven't listened to episode 45, go give it a listen before jumping into this one today. And so today what I want to do is use that last episode as a jumping off place to thinking about supporting gifted kids right where they're at through the lens that we often talk about here on this podcast. I want to use a deep understanding of kind of that frequency of uneven development that we see in our gifted kids, and then my own experience with working with gifted kids over the years. I want to provide some cues of curiosity, some perspective, and then some ideas of how we support our gifted kids who may have unevenness in their profile and help them come into balance. As always, if you like this episode, it would mean so much to me if you give it a like and a follow, as well as leave a comment. This will allow more people to find the show and make sure that you don't miss an episode. So let's start by just reviewing what giftedness might be or what that looks like. And I will not be able to do this justice. Mark did it so much more justice. But as an overview, when we're thinking about giftedness, it is really one area of development that is very well developed. Okay, that is higher than would be developmentally expected. Something that always struck me as I initially thought giftedness meant sort of high IQ, which is true, but that doesn't necessarily mean the full breadth of what giftedness could be. It's really like an area of development that is really, really well developed, and so it could be a child who is, able to understand the intricacies of a mechanical object or mechanical objects and be able to take them apart and put them back together very, very, very early. That could be an area of giftedness, that mechanical inclination. It could be in a motor area. And then, of course, it could also be in sort of more learning and cognition as more traditionally understood. And the thing that I really want to think about today is when we're seeing that unevenness in development, that uneven developmental profile, and what that can sometimes look like in our gifted kids. And I've seen this over the years. I have to be really honest. When families come in either through occupational therapy or through parent coaching, when their kids have this uneven profile, it can be really confusing. It can feel really unsettling to truly understand your child because things don't seem to always be lining up, right? There's areas that would make sense for your child to be able to successfully do. Often it's motor tasks or it's sort of daily routines, and they're just not able to. And it just is really challenging for parents to sort of reconcile these differences that we see. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about the specific differences that at least I've seen in my practice. And as Mark said so well, it can really be in all areas, really. It can go just across the gamut of developmental areas where we can see sort of this unevenness. But I'm just going to pull back a little bit and talk about the trends that I've seen in some of the kids that I have worked with who have been identified as gifted. And usually the kids that come in identified as gifted are gifted in sort of like learning and cognition, even though that, obviously is not the whole of it. One thing I think about is sensory processing, right? So we talk so much on this show about sensory processing, that ability to use the sensations that come in through our body, through movement, our internal sensations, to understand them and then give some motor response or give some response in some way back to our environment in order to have effect. And often what I notice, what I've seen as a trend, is that like focus, that understanding of the body, that understanding of this is how my body works. This is how sensations come in. This is how I make sense of them. Can sometimes look a little disconnected in my kids who have the ability to maybe cognitively problem solve or verbally problem solve really, really complex things. And so it's this disconnect between the body and the mind. It's this, my mind is so powerful and works so well and can create so many amazing things for me that my body necessarily can't keep up with or make sense of. And so an example I might hear from parents is, my child can talk like a little adult, right? They're able to, negotiate around anything in this world. However, when there's a change or something's different in their environment, there's a meltdown over the smallest things. Or my child is doing math or reading that's 3 grades above their level, and they can't figure out how to pack their backpack in the morning. So those are some of the examples of what I see when I'm noticing, gosh, I wonder if there's some uneven development. I actually spoke with a parent just this week, where they came in because school is really, really, really hard. And I dug a little bit more, and they disclosed that school is really, really, really hard. And their child is doing, math 3 grades above their level, reading a grade and a half above their level. But the teacher says that they can't stay on task and their desk is a mess, right? So that is leading to, right, some executive function concerns. At home, this child, is delightful and can do just amazing things and create amazing things and needs a cue every step of the way to get out the door in the morning. And so when I see this developmental unevenness, it's like I said, parents come in usually really confused. Like, what in the world's going on? Kids come in confused and sometimes with some self-esteem stuff because they know they can think their way through basically anything, but like things aren't working always for them. And so what I've had kids describe to me is like, I don't understand why I can't figure this out. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what we might think about as tools and strategies and ways we look at this from an occupational therapy lens. As you know, I'm an occupational therapist by training. I've had 25 years of experience in the field working with kids and families, specifically around the area of sensory processing in relationship and attachment and trauma. And when we're looking at occupational therapy, really our goal is we're looking through a developmental lens and we're looking through a lens of what is meaningful, useful, and important for our client, in this case, our child, in order to be able to fulfill their potential of what they want to do in the world. So for children, it's engaging, it's being successful at school, it's being able to get through their daily activities, it's being able to have effect and meaning on the world and autonomy on the world. So what is an occupational therapy then approach to working with a kid who might be identified as gifted? Or maybe you're listening and thinking, I wonder if that's my kid. I don't know. We don't have any evidence, sort of, neuropsych testing or evidence to show that. But I'm noticing these really even areas of development with, 1 or 2 areas that really seem to be really advanced. Our approach generally is going to be really looking at, is the body, is the sensory systems, is the nervous systems, is the motor systems supporting the development of where the development in the other areas is functioning, right? So typically the pattern I see is the motor, the sensory, the nervous system has areas of potential growth in order to really bolster sort of the cognition that we're seeing, or the areas of giftedness that we're seeing. And so what does that mean, and what does that look like in my practice? It's so fun to work with gifted kids in sort of a more traditional way. And what I see is this reliance on verbal language and negotiation, verbal problem solving in order to kind of get through their day. And so I bring them into session and we sort of like, create some challenge, some motor challenge maybe. One thing I might see is that we're not going to do a motor challenge. We're going to find all of the good reasons why we can't and why we don't. And usually they're very good reasons, right? All of the good reasons why I couldn't possibly move from one swing to the next. Good reasons why I couldn't possibly balance on that ball. When really what's under it is I don't feel really good and competent. My body isn't giving me that information to balance on the ball or to move effectively through space. And so the way that I really like to think about supporting my kids is finding activities that really turn off the verbal cognition, turn off the making sense of, and turn on just the embodiment. And what I mean by embodiment is feeling and sensing what's happening in our body without needing to make sense of or explain as a step one. So it's usually really, really challenging. What this can look like is just being on a swing, being on the floor in a way that doesn't have an end point or an end goal, isn't something where there's a requirement to think about it, do something about it, where we can just sense and feel our body without quickly moving it up into, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? Do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? We just need to learn how to sense and feel. And that's what embodiment really is understanding the sensations that just naturally come up in our body from a visceral sense, not from a cognitive sense, from a visceral sense. That means it's just attending to. And what I find in this work, when I just help with the slowing down, the decreasing of the language, the decreasing of the making sense of, is that first things first, it's usually really uncomfortable, right? If, as adults listening, I don't know if in your own system right now, when I'm talking about just feeling your body, if there's some discomfort in thinking about doing that for yourselves. It can feel really uncomfortable because we're so used to moving quickly in our world. And so we're so used to making sense of and explaining away that sometimes just the embodiment part can be tricky. And from there is where we help tie the developmental patterns of emotional regulation, sensory regulation, and move the developmental unevenness towards something that might be more even in our kids who might have giftedness and that unevenness in developmental patterns. And what I notice that this does is it helps create true connections back up to being able to verbalize what we feel, right? When we jump really quickly to feeling words and those kinds of things in our really gifted kids, what I notice is we glom onto the words and we're able to use the language, but we're not able to connect it. We're not able to connect it to how we truly feel. And then what happens is emotions still come flooding in, and they're so, so big and they're so, so intense because we aren't connected to the tiny, tiny cues that happen at the very beginnings of emotions. The other thing I sometimes see in this area when I'm working with my gifted kids is sort of like a shutdown or a refusal to try. Again, that sense of competence, that like I'm competent in all of these other areas, and this one area, often it's movement, feels really gross to me and I don't want to do it. Why would I do it when I'm really, really good at other things? And so when I see that shutdown and that refusal, first things first, as always, I'm going to honor, right? I'm going to honor this. This must be really tricky, or it's not something you really want to do. And then I'm going to start getting curious about the smallest possible nugget, the smallest possible activity, the smallest possible shift we can do that might feel okay. What does this look like? This looks like, let's say I am trying to support a child to get outside and play on the playground, right? That's a really big task when you really think about it. There's a lot of components to getting outside and playing on the playground, or go outside and play outside for 20 minutes, right? You got to plan. You got to move through the space. It's open-ended. There's nothing telling you what to do, right? You don't necessarily have control over everything. If that's too big and I get a no, I'm staying in my room and I'm staying on my computer. I'm not going outside. Outside is a straight up no. I'm not moving my body that way. All right. What can we do that's the smallest possible shift? Is it shifting how we're sitting so that there's some inherent movement while we're on our computer, right? Is this sitting on a ball or a wiggly cushion or a rocking chair or the floor or fill in the blank? Is this potentially going with you to the store to pick up something that's intriguing and maybe we walk from the back of the parking lot? Is this potentially exploring with a different kind of sensory system? So like, can we do something that's super tactile, touch based? So this would be, is it interesting enough to help me bank something? Is it interesting enough to help me paint something? In order to start showing that body that it has some competence, that there can be some abilities, and that we're not always going to get it right, right? In order to truly have the feed forward feedback loops in our motor systems, the feedback loop is, oh, that's not what I intended to do. And then shifting our body to do it again, right? You shoot a basket, you miss, you're going to hopefully adjust your body in some way to try to hit the basket, right? Those are the feed forward feedback loops in our bodies. And so that's what I notice from an occupational therapy lens when we're talking about that body up to brain in order to balance brain down to body. We're looking for both to come both ways. And we're taking it in small chunks. We're taking it in a way that pulls the need to cognitively process it down. The other thing that I do notice that can be of challenge with some of my really gifted kids in varieties of ways, and I alluded to this earlier, is that executive function, that ability, that plan. And there's a lot that goes into executive function. I'm not going to break that down today. That's probably for another podcast. But I'm going to just hit on the ability to plan, that motor planning, that ability to create a plan and then follow through on the plan. I noticed that all parts of planning can be really, really challenging some of the time for some of our really gifted kids, with the exception of sometimes when it's a really strong special interest, which can be the giftedness, right? The special interest of, I can take apart and put back together a computer and make it better and make it run faster in 20 minutes. And I know exactly the steps I should be doing. I will never be able to do that in my set of skills. But for some who have those specific and very, very highly developed skills, that's a very easy plan. But generally, when we're looking at daily life, right, we're looking at that we need to get up in the morning and in some way do some sort of morning routine. At some point in our days, we're going to change our clothes. At some point in our days, we hope we're going to brush our teeth. We're going to clean ourselves in some way, and we're going to put some food in our body. The daily routines that we really need to make happen in order just to create health in our own systems and that little bit of routine. We need to potentially get some pieces and some things together to get out the door for whatever activity we're doing during the day. And those motor planning activities are sometimes also incredibly challenging. I've had kids verbalize this to me that they just can't understand why they can't do it in the past. And I find it fairly interesting. The other thing I see is a lot of kids who have a lot of ideas and really good ideas. These really like elaborate, amazing, thought out, great ideas, but very little carry through, right? So we have all the ideas and then we don't know where to start. We don't know what to do. And so we stay in idea land and we never move into action. And so from an occupational therapy lens, my job, our job as parents, there's a few things that we can do. One is to help, I'm going to say scaffold. So scaffold means that I'm going to put in just enough support to create success initially, and then I'll be able to pull the support away eventually. Scaffold ideas. So for me, it might be like, wow, I see you want to make this really cool fort and it looks amazing. And you're going to use 20 pillows and you're going to have a window and you're going to have a ceiling and then you're going to have a tunnel to crawl in. Let's talk about step one. Step one is often kids aren't sure what step one is. And so my job is to help that brain that has this really big idea, pull it into like tiny little components. This happens frequently with homework as well, right? The learning of the work isn't the problem. It's the where do I start and then what do I do next? So I'm going to consistently help break the problem down. Tell me step one. I don't know. All right. I have an idea for step one. Step one is we're going to get the one math worksheet out that you have. We're not going to talk about the rest. We're going to stay to step one in order to help their brains create some strategy around how we break problems down. So that is one of the ways that I really support sort of that motor planning piece. I support as early as possible using written tools, using online tools, using watches and timer tools in order to help the breaking of it down and help the timing of the steps. It's also important to know that we see this across executive function concerns. I especially see this in my gifted kids, is when like some days, like it's quite easy. And then some days it's really not. And that could be really confusing to parents. You know, some days our brains are a little less cluttered on the inside, right? If we're a really big idea, if that's part of our giftedness, is we've just got these amazing big ideas. Sometimes our brains are a little cluttered because we've got a lot of ideas that day, and that makes it really hard to break those things down. And so a strategy that I really want to make sure parents know is that we're going to give the breaking down and those tools every day, right? So that as our children grow into gifted, amazing, functional adults, they know that this is just what I go back to on my brain cluttery days. This is just what I go back to on my days that my mind wants to move off into something way cooler than brushing my teeth, putting on my deodorant, and getting out the door. So that we can have those external backup cues there at the ready in order to support function no matter where our function is at for the days. In looking at how we do this from a parenting perspective, I've talked a little bit about what I might do in an occupational therapy session and how I might support parents that way. One of the things I really like to think about as we're supporting our gifted kids with sort of some of the developmental unevenness is, gosh, can we create cues of curiosity? Can we create curious questions so that kids can, well, first of all, so that we as parents can learn to identify the differences in our kids, the developmental differences. I think it's challenging sometimes for parents because they're just so confused as to what's going on. So step one is often getting really curious about what's going on. Again, this parent I just did an intake with recently, I pointed out, I'm like, I don't know because I'm not a diagnostician, nor have I ever met your child, but gosh, I'm hearing that there's some developmental differences. There's some unevenness here. And so we started getting curious, like, where is your child really, really successful? Where are the really big struggles? What kind of supports are generally working and what supports are not working? And for this child, with this parent, we were able to identify, like, gosh, I think that there might be some cognitive advancement paired with some probably fairly significant executive function deficits, areas of challenge, question mark, Motor skills. Motor skills also, I'm not sure how easy they are. And so when you put that together, the curiosity of it is, well, that starts making a little more sense, right? And then once we have some curiosity, we can help our kids create curiosity for themselves. Like, oh, I noticed that when it gets uncomfortable, you really want to use your words and explain things a lot. That's powerful. That's really amazing. What happens in your body when things get uncomfortable? Do you want to just like shut down or move, or what does that feel like for you? And it's in that curiosity that helps kids start to understand themselves and then honor themselves. Our goal is that we can honor ourselves so that we can then support ourselves to function in the way that we choose to. It also helps us both as parents and as a child reframe, right? This isn't that I'm just bad at things, or this isn't that I'm always getting things wrong, or that I'm being difficult, or that my child is being difficult. This is that this area is a little bit trickier for me. This area is a lot easier for me. So then how can I support the tricky part, right? So it's in that curiosity that really builds connection, it builds understanding, and then it builds the ability to have autonomy and create improved function. And so the last thing I want to think about is if you're giving this episode a listen today and you're curious and you're thinking about your own child and you're like, I hadn't thought about it maybe this way before, or I'm wondering, right, if there's some unevenness to the profile with some giftedness in some area, what do you do? What I'm going to recommend that you do is twofold. One, I'm going to recommend that you get incredibly curious and incredibly observant of your child and with your child. Okay. I'm going to encourage that you let go of maybe some of the old stories that might be rolling around in your head about, intentionality. Like, is my child intentionally being difficult? Maybe let go of some of the stories around why can't they, the shoulds, they should be able to's, and get curious just about what you're seeing. I think that there's just so much power in that. And then the second thing I'm going to encourage you to do is find a professional who understands giftedness. Do some testing potentially, if that seems right to you. If there's some question marks around giftedness from a cognitive perspective, if there's some curiosity around executive function concerns, to get some understanding, some more deep understanding, and then find some professionals who understand what this uneven profile can look like. There are many out there. The right one is the one that's a good fit for your family, right? So there's occupational therapy. We do this here at Children's Therapy Network. There's Mark, and I will list his business down in our show notes, who does this work from a counseling perspective. There are many professionals who are able to understand what the developmental split can look like and how to really support it, both from a function perspective and also from a mental health perspective. And so I would encourage you to find that support for both yourself and for your child. I think I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much. Where They're Planted is a Lit Path Studios podcast and is produced by Jamie Gale and Jen Bluske. Music is by Gaston Reen and Pod 5. Thank you for loving your child right where they're planted.